Hey all, this is awesome. I don't know that I've ever done a talk while drinking a mimosa, so this is really cool. Thank you all so much for coming out. I'm really excited, and thanks to John and everyone for organizing today, because I'd argue cybercrime, as Sherrod said, I totally agree. It's way cooler than APT. Also affects a lot more orgs. So I'm Katie, when I'm not tweeting from the BRUNCHCON account. I'm the director of Intel for Red Canary. We do managed detection response, so I get to see a bunch of different threats. I also teach for SANS, and I'm also a fellow at the Atlantic Council. So we're going to talk a little bit today about crypters, and I have to be honest, I was a little bit terrified that Glyer was going to talk about these, and I was going to be like a really sad follow-up, but he didn't, so this is awesome. Because I'm going to argue that crypters are something that we should be talking about more as cybercrime researchers, because a lot of adversaries use them, so let's dive right in. If you're wondering, yes, my title is a reference to Stefan from SNL, because when I was trying to figure out, like, what should I title this? Crypters do indeed have everything, and they're the new hotness, they're the hot new club that adversaries love. So yes, Stefan reference to kick us off. What is a crypter? Surprisingly, this slide was kind of hard to figure out, because like, crypters can mean a lot of different things, right? Sometimes they're a service that a legitimate organization, aka criminal organization, will provide. Sometimes they're a tool that is sold. But crypters basically allow adversaries to encrypt code, right? They also allow for loading of other code, obfuscation, a lot of things. So that's why the Stefan reference was appropriate, right? The crypters do a lot of things, and they provide a lot of benefits to adversaries as they are trying to hide their malware, which we will talk about. So they do indeed have everything. So here's a simplified image of how I think about crypters, right? You have some kind of malicious payload, like those stealers that Glyer talked about, right? Vidar, Redline, etc. And adversaries don't want to just drop that code. Antivirus might detect it, so they use a crypter to encrypt it, to make it tougher for antivirus to detect. So I think of it as sort of like the little encrypted candy wrapper outside of the malicious code, the payload that does the actual bad things. I'm going to talk about two common crypters that we see across a lot of different environments and give you some ideas for detection, because I would argue that's one of the points of threat intelligence people. We should be enabling detection in many cases. So one of these really common crypters is called Cypher IT. And I don't think this one is up anymore, but this was an advertisement from one of their previous websites, right? Cypher IT, the best crypter on the market. They have to market too. And they use this abbreviation here, FUD. So I don't like either type of FUD. I usually think of FUD as fear, uncertainty, and doubt. In this case, FUD stands for fully undetectable. So sounds pretty good. If I'm a bad guy, I'm like, great, I can get this crypter, makes my malware fully undetectable. Awesome, I totally want that. No, this is one of my favorite GIFs that's not Legally Blonde or Mean Girls. Yeah, sure, Jan, fully undetectable? Okay, fully undetectable to antivirus, right? That's totally fine, but I think a lot of folks in the cybersecurity community have realized antivirus isn't really sufficient to detect all of the bad things. And this might seem really obvious, but we still will get people who are like, how did you detect that? Our antivirus didn't. And you're like, antivirus will absolutely wipe out a lot, but adversaries are realizing that it doesn't detect everything, especially when you use a crypter, right? So you have to bring in that endpoint telemetry, whether it's something like Sysmon, Velociraptor, or a commercial endpoint tool, right? That's the new hotness. We absolutely have to shift to collecting that endpoint telemetry. AV is just not enough. So the good news here, there are lots of detection opportunities. And that's a phrase that my team likes to use, right? Any of these threats, we have opportunities to detect them, often in many, many different ways. And so Cypher IT uses Auto IT, which is a legitimate scripting language. And one of the things that we like to recommend for a lot of detection of bad things is looking for renamed legitimate tools, right? So Auto IT, it's legitimate binary, but if it, doesn't have Auto IT in the file name, adversary might try to rename it. Just that act of masquerading is something that we as defenders can detect on. So That's one detection opportunity. We found as we've looked through a lot of endpoint telemetry, there are other common strings. So, right, looking for find string commands, right, timeout commands like we have on the slide. And this is all in blog posts, so you don't need to obsessively take pictures of the slides like I do because I don't trust anyone and I want the content. So lots of detection opportunities on Cypher IT. First crypter we see really commonly. Another crypter that we see quite a bit of is called PureCrypter, and this one's execution flow is a little more complex, right? I kind of visualize that, oh, crypter, wrapped around the payload. Well, sometimes it also downloads additional code, right? So our main Cypher IT PureCrypter package, right, is called drive.exe, reaches out to someone else's computer. Credit goes to my teammate Tony Lambert for that term, right? Downloads from somewhere, then it waits a little bit, right? Uses this PowerShell command to sleep, to have a little bit of a delay. Then it does some injection, right? It spawns a new process and it injects its assembly into that new process. Lastly, kind of cleans up, removes that executable file. So, right, all of that behavior, we could argue, is really the crypter doing that. So one of the challenges our team has really faced is sort of dividing, like, what's the crypter versus the payload? But as I'll talk about in a moment, that can be really important to start to differentiate, right? What are certain parts of these threats? So again, PureCrypter, just a little bit more complex flow, showing that crypters don't just encrypt, they can also download content. Again, lots of detection opportunities. If you have any endpoint telemetry, looking for encoded PowerShell is going to give you so much bang for your buck. I sometimes hear red teamers being like, PowerShell is dead. It's not dead. Adversaries use PowerShell all the time. Looking for encoded PowerShell, really great way to catch a lot of things, including PureCrypter. So looking for that delay, that start sleep command, once you decode that PowerShell, is one thing that you might identify with PureCrypter. Other threats also use it, so you might pick them up as well. Oh no, we might not just detect PureCrypter, we might detect other threats, like, sorry, the detection works. Also looking for some exclusions, right? Trying to avoid Windows Defender, for example, another detection opportunity for PureCrypter. So what? You're like, cool, crypters, that sounds neat. So my team kind of went on a journey, right? We all mature, we all expand our understanding of threats. And so, right, back in 2021, as we were trying to track all these stealers, like, for example, Redline, we'd look at a detection and we'd be like, cool, look at all these commands, look at this activity. We call this Redline. And then over time, my really, really smart team started looking into crypters more and realized, hey, that's not all just Redline. That's actually Cypher IT, the crypter that's encrypting, packaging up the payload of Redline, right? And my argument is that it's really important to track these things as distinct because adversaries will reuse this crypter on many different payloads, right? Glyer talked about Raccoon and Vidar and all these other stealers and malware families. Well, the cool thing is that if you're tracking these crypters, you can detect smarter. Work smarter, not harder. Right? If you have detection on Cypher IT or on PureCrypter, cool. Regardless of whether that is encrypting CryptBot, Redline, Vidar, Raccoon, you're going to be able to find it, right? Because the very act of the adversaries trying to hide that payload from us gives us something that we can detect on. So that's why I'd argue that we should pay a lot more attention to crypters. This is something that you'll see a couple blogs on, but not a whole lot in this community. So hopefully I've convinced you a little bit at least that crypters are really worth tracking. I hope it's something that this community will share more on. There are many more out there that probably a lot of people don't even know about. And again, we can get a lot of bang for our buck in detection if we divide the crypter from the payload. So hopefully kind of a call to action for everyone to release more research and share because we can take this fully undetectable stuff to very easily detectable. That's all I got.